May 17th, please. Thank
Second.
you. Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, so now we will hear from Debbie Leos about our 2019 financials. Debbie, do you want to come forward, please, and let us know where we are?
Well, good morning, Finance Committee.
Good morning.
Can you hear me all right? I'm a little vertically challenged, so. Well, we're all the way up through May, and as yesterday I was talking to Commissioner Long, and one of the things that I'm really proud of is that for every month during this fiscal year and even before that, we have been providing you with financials. That's a little different than what we've seen in the past, so that'll make this coming year go so much easier. So we're reporting actually for the month ending of May, the year-to-date through May. And we have a surplus of $7,200 as compared to a budget of $115,000. So we're well below budget, but again, we're a little behind on a couple things, and that would be just the timing of the Regional Transit Development Plan. So that affects both the expenses and the revenue side of things. And that is moving forward quite well. We are staffing up, so we're now seeing where before we were under budget in salaries, we're catching up with that. And everything else is pretty much under budget. You're under budget in professional services, so you're not using a lot of the things that you've had in the past. You don't have, we budgeted for accounting services, which we now have Melanie Williams here, who is doing a phenomenal job. She's made my life so easy, so I really appreciate that. One of the areas that's under budget that we're working on diligently is the Pick My Kid program. That's really affecting the expense line, and I know they're working hard on that, and we got a grant extension on that to move that forward. We're doing quite well on the, which we always ask about on the money side of life. We have at the end of May in the bank accounts $136,957, and a piece of that is for the RTDP, where we were given $100,000 up front to be able to use to help pay bills. So we appreciate FDOT for that advance. And the rest was we had $80,000 of cash in the bank. And so now we have the expenses, or not the expenses, but everything else is pretty good. The accounts payable, we are current on everything in accounts payable and have been during the course of this fiscal year.
Wow.
So we're pleased to report that.
That is such a great accomplishment. Thank you so much for paying our bills. Signing.
We've got a rhythm going here, and we'd like to keep it going. But that really is it. We've got money in the bank. We have the expenses, and the income is coming in. Melanie has been working hard as well as PSTA and getting reimbursements back from the state. We've had a meeting with FDOT to basically manage our expectations of how long it takes money to come in. One of the things that we were under the impression of for the longest time was once we submit a request for reimbursement, it would take 8 to 10 days. What we were finding is it takes more like 30 days. So when we work on our cash flows, we're working on a 30-day premise rather than an 8 to 10 day. Otherwise, we are constantly calling and saying, where's our money? So I think with that in mind, we've now been working on rolling cash flows that Melanie's been doing. That's been very, very helpful.
It's a little more based in reality, I think.
Correct.
Very good.
I had a quick question on
Good. Please.
the Pick My Kid program. You'd mentioned something briefly about that when you came through, and I didn't really pick up.
Okay, the Pick My Kid program is something that a developer out of the Tampa area has actually done. It's a great little program. And Cindy may be able to help me with this. But when you've got your child at school, and if you've ever gone, which I've done, to go pick up your children, you end up in a line around the block just waiting. This is basically like an app-type program where you can schedule the time so you know exactly when to be in the line, so it keeps the traffic flowing. And what the money in the grant is for is basically to outfit the schools with the ability, sort of like stipends, to be able to do any of the work to allow the app to work well.
And do you happen to know what schools are currently, is there schools
That I
schools in
do not.
Hernando?
I
or-
don't know.
I'm familiar with the program. I think it's a great idea. I know a presentation was made to Hernando County. I was just curious as to whether they had taken up the opportunity.
The first introductory period, there was 4 schools. There was 1 in Pinellas County and I think 3 in Hillsborough. Right now, the vendor, Pick My Kid, is working on, they've gotten applications from 141 schools throughout the entire TBARTA area, and they're working on narrowing those down. We readjusted as we got that grant extension, reallocated some of the funding to be able to bring more schools in, to do 30 schools total as opposed to just 20. So they're still working through the interview period to try to determine which schools actually have a need, but we've asked them to make sure we have good coverage in all the counties. We don't have a complete list yet, and they're kind of on hiatus for the summer, but once we get closer to the new school year, they're going to be trying to get as many as possible on before the end of the year, and we can certainly report back to you as those schools come online.
Cindy,
Thank you.
could you please state your name and address for the record?
Cindy Raskin, Director of Commuter Services for TBARTA.
Thank you.
If you've ever dropped your kids off at school, you'd understand how important that program can be.
Yeah.
So I hope it works out, and I'd like to see it extend into all the counties within our jurisdiction as the opportunity arises.
Absolutely. So the Pick My Kid, the grant dollars, the way we've reallocated those dollars, we're paying for the licensing fee, and then Pick My Kid is picking up the implementation fee, so they go and set up the school. And basically the way it works is you're the parent and you have the app on your phone, and the school has a tablet or a laptop at the front of car line, and as you come in, you check in and say, I'm here. And then the system is able to put the cars in order on the screen so they can line the kids up in order. So as you know, everything kind of flows really quickly. So we would love to have something that went to all of the schools. Elementary schools seem to be the ones that have the biggest car line issues, or like the charters that don't have school buses.
Well, and part of that is for security, because I know when I've gone to pick up years ago my own children, but now my grandchildren, they're very careful about who that young one gets in the car with.
Absolutely. Pick My Kid is really neat with that too, because the parent can authorize additional pickups. So let's say there is an emergency and grandma, is visiting from out of town and needs to pick up the kid, but isn't on that yellow health card from the first day of school. The parent can authorize somebody for that day only to be authorized to pick up, and the apps all align. It's really very convenient.
Terrific.
Thank
Yes,
you very
Re-
much. Thank you.
Thank
Do
you.
you-
Reggie?
Excuse me, I have a question. Do you know if any of the schools that could be considered in Manatee County?
I don't know offhand. I know we got schools from all the counties that are TBARTA service area. I don't know the entire list of schools that applied.
Thank you.
So if we have a list of schools in our head that might be beneficial for the program, would it be helpful if we gave that list to David and he could share it with you? And then you
Absolutely.
could-
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you, Cindy.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Chair,
for
a
Cindy?
question for
Yeah.
Debbie. An ongoing issue we've had is the time between we pay our bills and get grant reimbursement. And that gap is closed, and we're doing much better in terms of cash flow. But in discussions with David, there still may be a need for a commercial revolving line of credit to fill the
Correct.
gap in there. And I wanted to get your thoughts and comments on this and see if a further recommendation would be made to the Finance Committee to consider that with a commercial banking institution, especially since our cash positions have dramatically increased.
Thank you so much for bringing that up, Chair Holton. We've worked at PSTA with BMO as well to put out a solicitation for like a revolving line of credit. And the reason being is as the organization is growing and putting things together, and the timing on a reality factor, as Commissioner Long said, for when we get reimbursements, I would feel much more comfortable having a line of credit available to us to be able to just know that we've got the money in the bank for all of our expenses to keep paying everything on time. And, we are going to be having some larger expenses coming forward as well with, the different projects that we're working on. So I think it'd behoove us. What I'm looking at is a $500,000 line of credit for 1 year with renewables for another 2 years. If both at the whatever financial institution and at the board's will.
Right, and the staff will bring a recommendation.
We should be able to do that at the August committee meeting.
Good.
You know, you said 1 year, so it'll be a line of credit that has to be paid off within a year.
Doesn't have to, well, it should be. In theory, we should be able to say, well, I need $50,000 this week to make these bills. I get the reimbursement within, we've been doing it monthly, so within 30 days. Some bills that are paid at the beginning of the month, you've got, let's say, 30 days in that month. FDOT requires only once a month that you are allowed to put in a request for reimbursement. Another 30 days, so there might be up to a 60-day lag in time between when you make the payment and get the money. So in theory, we should be able to pay off no longer than 60 days out, so that nothing would ever be outstanding. Should be more for an emergency use only. All of this may be somewhat of a moot point if we get the $1.5 million in the manner in which we've requested it.
Even if we do get that funding, I think the line of credit's a great idea, as long as there's a policy for how it's paid off, and it needs to be timely. We want it to be a bridge, not a growing fund.
Not a cumulative.
Right.
And just so the board knows, in the past when I've done lines of credit, whether it be for HART or other organizations, if you have an unused line, there may possibly be an unused line fee that goes with that. So you may have to pay a little bit of money each year, even if you don't use it.
Typically, these things are for a year, and the bank rolls them over, but they typically require you to pay it down and then audit it roll it over again. So I think that issue will solve itself in terms of, it won't have to be termed, the loan will never conceivably be termed out. It'll just continue
Right.
on and on as we
So I have a question for Commissioner Manuel. Was that a slip of the tongue when you said if we get the money?
When we get the money, I'd still like to have the line of credit.
I feel so much better now. Thank you so much.
A brief fog went over me, but it's clear now.
You have to be very careful when you put that karma out there.
I agree.
Okay. Thank you for that
So
clarification.
noted and clarified. Thank you.
Although I will add that I did run into the governor, and he said it's under review. So,
I know it, but what is this hang up, for God's sake? He's been back for Israel for a couple of weeks now.
I think they just delivered him the budget late, and they've been staff's working on it. So
Everybody's waiting on.
I don't foresee any
28th.
problem.
Well, how about you make a little,
Oh, trust me, I made the pitch for that and other things. So.
okay.
Any other questions?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else, members? No? Okay, thank you so much for that. And now, for the great news I know you're prepared to bring to us. Can we please have Clifton Larson and his gang come forward? His gang. Welcome, good morning. Please
Okay.
identify yourselves, name and,
Andrew Laughlin, Principal, Clifton Larson Allen, accompanied by Lance Schmidt, also Principal of Clifton Larson Allen. Great to be here. Many familiar faces in the group. Good to see you all again. Bringing the good news. Well, Debbie already brought a lot of great news, talking about our cash position, having good cash in the bank, and I'm very appreciative of that as well. No longer do we have to have those difficult conversations with the managing partner in my office about why we have a 9-month outstanding invoice with TBARTA. So appreciative that we no longer have to have those conversations going forward. So
we're happy too.
that's certainly a great thing indeed. We'll get the PowerPoint presentation loaded and we'll do our presentation. Okay, so great news is the audit's substantially complete. Have the presentation here before you. We also have financial statements as well as a presentation. We'll just cover the presentation slides, but please stop us if you have any questions. So I'll start with the first couple slides and turn it over to Lance. I'll talk first about just the composition of our engagement team. We have principals. We have both myself and Lance. This is a little different in years past. I wanted to bring on Lance as an additional resource. He co-leads, along with me, our Florida local government practice. So I figured, hey, 2 heads is better than 1 to get this done on time and bring his level of expertise. Plus for you all, having 2 principals for the price of 1 is not a bad deal either. So happy to have Lance on board to help see the completion of this audit. We also have a director, Danny Springfells, and our in-charge senior auditor, Kim Pobletti. We're very industry focused at CLA, so what you're getting is our government sector team in Florida. So Danny and Kim, we work on all of our local government jobs throughout the state of Florida, from big counties to smaller special districts like TBARTA. So they also have all the knowledge and expertise relating to governmental accounting. You were staring at me the whole time? Oh, God. There we go. Much better. We also had a quality reviewer, and we have a second review process, what we kind of call our second partner review, concur partner review, that goes through a pool nationally of GASB dedicated second reviewers, and the reviewers pull from the pool, and they're, like I said, they're all government focused, and Nancy Jones is our reviewer for this one. So just talking about the services that we did perform. So we have our annual financial statement audit. That's standard. That's based on the numbers that are in the report, numbers in the note disclosures. We also have some compliance work that we do as well, federal and state compliance. So we had a single audit that was required because over $750,000 was spent on both federal and state grants. So when that happens, that kicks in a single audit requirement. So we had a single audit for both federal and state. Lance will kind of go into the details of what programs were tested and how much coverage was performed in those federal and state single audits. We also have an examination that we do that's over investment compliance, so that covers what amounts you have in cash as a qualified public depositories. If you have invested assets, do you have an investment policy? If you don't, do you follow state guidelines of how to invest those funds? Those are all things that we consider for our clients and evaluate compliance on that and report on that in the examination. And then one that was new this year, and that was one that I took the primary lead role on, that's an agreed upon procedure report. So we have not done this in the past, so I'll kind of give a little explanation. This is over the NTD, or National Transit Database report, on your van pool program. So if you have over 100 vehicles in circulation within your transit agency, then that kicks in a requirement to have an independent auditor like myself come in and provide a report on that. And that's called an agreed upon procedures report. It's not an assurance report, but it's an attest service. And what we do is there's prescribed procedures set by NTD that say, okay, for this program that you have, here are all these steps that you need to complete. So what the van pool program is and how it relates to this report, TBARTA uses enterprise services. It's enterprise something, but through Enterprise Rent-A-Car, that they're basically the operating wheel behind the van pool program. So through the van rentals and the trips, and Enterprise collects all that data on all the routes and who's going, and so all that gets accumulated and then sent to TBARTA. TBARTA dissects that, reviews it, evaluates it for reasonableness, and then gets the monthly data as well as an annual report, and then has to take that information and enter it into the applicable NTD forms that are then uploaded to the NTD analyst for review. So we kind of say perform some procedures around that whole process to make sure that those numbers, or evaluate the steps involving validation that those numbers that were put in the report are complete and accurate. So that's the procedures that we did around that. And we issued that report, I believe, earlier in May, and worked with Michael Case and your staff. He was the primary project manager that we worked with at TBARTA to get that done. So that's the agreed upon procedures that we did. It will be an annual requirement going forward as long as you all continue to have 100 or more van pool vehicles in circulation, and the program continues to grow in popularity. So hopefully that is the case. Great for me is it's additional work that we get to do and additional services we get to provide for you. So happy to continue to doing it, but that's the requirement, and we'll continue to have that going forward. I'll turn it over to Lance just to talk about some of the reports that we issued and conclusions reached.
Thank you, Andrew. So I want to cover, Andrew kind of went over all the different services that we provide, and I want to provide you the results of those procedures that we performed. So the first report that we issue is our independent auditor's report. That's what you typically think of when you think of an audit. That's kind of the financial part of our audit where we're looking at the footnotes and the numbers. Glad to report that you received an unmodified opinion, which is kind of the equivalent of a clean opinion. We use the term unmodified because we're able to say that everything is materially correct and complies with GAAP. And we don't have to say except for. If we had to say except for, it would be a qualified report. So unmodified means you get a standard clean report. So again, very good news there. In addition to that, we issue internal auditors report over internal controls as it relates to compiling your financial statements. And so what this report is doing is saying, do you have proper controls and checks and balances in place to ensure you capture everything and get it recorded correctly? If we have any findings or issues to report, they go in this report. We had one this year. We had one material weakness that we'll talk about a little more on the next slide. And then lastly, we also we talked about the single audit or the compliance audit. When we talk about the compliance audit, we're going well beyond just the numbers. So we're really getting into the reports that are going to the various granting agencies, really getting into the weeds, looking at rides, looking at all kinds of operational information, more than just the numbers. And so we did have some recommendations there for both the federal and the state single audit. So I want to just briefly go over these. All of this information is in the financial statements, and it's unabridged version, so you can see all of the responses, or you can see kind of the detail of the findings, including the context of the findings. In addition, management has also provided their responses to those findings as well. And so I want to preface this by saying TBARTA had actually engaged CLA last year to do a consulting engagement to basically figure out, kind of where compliance was at. How are we doing on grant management, grant compliance? Are we dotting the I's and crossing the T's exactly the way we should? That procedure was done June, July timeframe of last year and wrapped up in September of 2018. And so we're here to present the September 30, 2018 financial statements. And so the results of those procedures that we provided, which was a consulting engagement, had a lot of recommendations, best practices, other things that really should be considered as you look at grant management. And so today, we do have several findings here related to the testing. Many of these were discussed in that other consulting engagement that we did. So if you've heard these before, it's because we were actually auditing the program this year. It was more of a consulting project in the past. We were trying to get ahead of it, but it does take time to kind of fix things, especially when we look at the year ends that we were looking at. And so the very first one had to do with year-end closing procedures, which is really, it kind of talks to, how well are you actually capturing everything? How many journal entries do you have? Are the numbers that you're looking at on a regular basis, do they, are you seeing the same thing in, September when you're looking at the board report as you see in June when you're getting the final audit report? We did have several audit adjustments and some reconciliations that, needed some tweaking. And so as a repeat finding from last year, the good news is you guys have already transitioned with getting some additional help from Debbie and her team over at PSTA. So we feel that, can't opine on whether or not it's been fixed or not, but we obviously feel that you guys are heading in the right direction, getting some additional assistance and also bringing on Melanie as well. Besides the financial statement finding, we had 3 findings for our federal compliance. The first one was for cash management reporting. In reporting, and what this stands for, this was a significant deficiency. So we have 3 levels of findings. I should probably explain that. Material weakness is the most severe. That's basically saying if you don't fix it, you're going to have material issues. Significant deficiency is if you don't do something now, in the future you could have big issues. And then we have just other recommendations and comments. And so these the last 6 that we're going to go over are significant deficiencies. The first one are related to cash management reporting. As TBARTA has grants, what they're required to do is on a regular basis, request for reimbursement for certain expenses that are incurred. And ideally that would be done on a routine and regular basis. We noted that there was a kind of a delayed, kind of a protracted period of time at the beginning of the year that things were not being requested on a regular and timely basis the way the grantor requested it. So obviously we had a finding for that. The second one had to do with procurements. The issue that we had on federal compliance really is something that has been, management's told us has been corrected, and we actually have a copy of this. The procurement policy that was in place during the year did not comply with uniform guidance standards. And so we didn't necessarily have a compliance issue, but more so that without having the proper policy in place, you can't ensure that you comply with all the federal rules and regulations. And so that's something that has been updated already. Finding 2018-04 and 05 really are one and the same, but we had to split them out between federal and state. So what grantor agencies require as it relates to costs that TBARTA asks for reimbursement? This applies to anyone who has federal and state grants that are reimbursement basis in nature. They want to ensure that the reimbursements that they're providing to BARTA are based on actual cost, and or if they're allocated costs, that allocation method is both reasonable, equitable, and fair. And so what we discovered as we kind of got into looking at this is that what was really happening was costs were not necessarily being done on a consistent basis throughout the year or on an objective measure. Rather, what was happening was okay, well, this budget's got kind of the resources here, so we'll put a little more, maybe rent going to this one, or maybe okay, now we're over here and we'll put a little more rent going to that one because we got more budget over there. And so I want to make it clear that we did not find any instances that the costs charged to the grants were unallowable. So all the costs that we saw are normal and reasonable expenses we would see with the grants. Our comment really, discussed the point of having a documented methodology and process for allocating expenses between grants so that the grantor agencies feel like those costs are, again, fair and equitable, and there's a good justifiable reason why they're incurring that portion of the expense. And so we've talked at length with management on that one, and we'll continue to offer our services to provide best practices that we see at other organizations on how to comply with that standard. Next one had to do with procurement testing again for state grants. Our issue here is we looked at 8 different vendors to ensure that they had proper procurement. Of those 8, we noted one that did not comply with the current policy that was in place. And so obviously recommend that, that be kind of adhered to and followed. And I think we'll see increased, revision and kind of oversight on procurement. I'm hoping this one will go away in the future as well. And then lastly, with pretty much all grants, there usually is a reporting requirement to report back to the grantor agency the results of expenditures, performance data, et cetera. We looked at both quarterly and monthly reports that are required underneath the state grants, and we noted that there was one particular month where a report was required to be filed and it was just simply never filed. And so because of that, we reported that as a finding as well. And so I know I just gave you a ton of information kind of regarding the grants, and so I want to just kind of pause for a moment and see if there's any questions that I could answer.
Sure. Yes.
To your knowledge, of all those deficiencies been remedied now by management?
Yeah, so we're not officially allowed to say whether or not they've been corrected because we haven't gone through and tested them obviously yet. But I can say that for some of them, definitely the procurement, I know that procurement was adopted in January of 2019, which was finding 2018-003. Cash management and again, the other procurement kind of goes with that one as well. When it comes to the reporting and the cash management, we've seen, obviously, as the working with the team that's in place now, that things are being more done on a more timely basis. I think hearing the report that we just heard a minute ago that vendors are being paid timely is kind of a testament to that, because that's what we were noticing as well, was that there was some lags there. And so can't say officially because we haven't obviously tested it yet, but it does seem like a lot of good movement in the right direction to remedy these issues. Yeah.
And I think it's testament to the staff that we are now having finance committee meetings every month to keep us on track and make sure that everything is I's are dotted and T's are crossed. So that's a huge improvement from where we were. I'll just be so happy when we get past having to talk about the past, because we're in such a different place today.
Yes.
Madam Chair.
Yes?
Thank you. Going back to the allocation aspect of it, it was a policy and it was absent, presumably, and the objectivism of where to do it and when. And did you all provide a template for us to be able to take and implement fairly quickly to be able to resolve that?
Yeah, so it's kind of two-part, I guess. The first one is having a methodology or policy as to how you allocate. It's generally not a formal policy, more of a SOP, if you will, standard operating procedure on how that gets done. So I want to say the challenge, or challenge is probably the good word. So the challenge of designing a cost allocation methodology is that it is specific to each organization. And so, for example, if we wanted to take rent expense, it's just an easy one to kind of talk about. So when it comes to allocating rent expense, we have several different options. We could do that based on headcount and the number of people in the office. Meaning that if you've got 6 people and 2 people work on this grant, 2 people work on grant B, and 2 people on grant C, we could go a third, a third, a third. You could also do it based on square footage. So maybe you've got one grant that's taking up 50% of the floor space, and then just in terms of maybe area. And so and then potentially there are going to be some expenses where there isn't a real clean, easy mathematical calculation. And so what you have to do is you have to look at all of your expenses, TBARTA does, and figure out, okay, what is the most equitable, fair way to allocate these expenses, based on the operations of TBARTA. And so as new grants come on, that changes, so it's kind of been a constant state of flux. So what we've done is we've shared some of those best practices on ideas on how to do that allocation method, but it's going to be obviously a bit of a process to get all that documented.
So to clarify then, if I'm understanding you correctly, there's not necessarily a best practice that we can implement, but what we would do is use our own subjective mechanisms, put it into a standard operating procedure, and then it would rise to the level of subjective compliance.
Well, if I could interrupt for just a moment. For the members that are new, that are serving on finance, this is what happens when you have really competent people that are working with your grants and your dollars that are coming in from the federal government and from the state government, along with your local contributions. And that is all a very complex, cumbersome process. And in an effort to ensure that dollars coming in were being allocated properly and being put in the right pots, I'm calling them pots for lack of a different word. There are many of them, especially at the federal level. Our Debbie Leos created a color-coded chart to help the staff understand, no, you can't pay that bill from over here. You have to pay it from this pot, and that kind of thing. So she, to her credit, actually wrote the software. Am I saying it right, Debbie? Well, she wrote the software to help keep everything on the straight and narrow. So we're very fortunate that we had her behind the scenes, dotting I's and crossing T's. And I venture to say, when you come next year and do this again, it's going to be golden.
Right, Debbie?
No pressure.
Yeah, certainly. So does that answer the question?
Yeah, so, okay.
Yeah,
So we already have those mechanisms in place, and it will show the next time we have this.
They're being developed, we'll say
Correct.
that.
Okay.
At least on that point, I know it's something we've kind of talked about.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yep, certainly. There's no other questions. Did want to just go over some required governance communication. Kind of once you get the final bound audit, you'll also receive kind of a stapled letter that kind of gives the unabridged version of everything we're required to communicate to governance, but I just want to hit on the high points. If we had any difficulties encountered during the audit, we'd be required to communicate those. By the report, we had none. When you get that letter, final letter, you'll see any corrected or uncorrected misstatements we have. So corrected misstatement is a fancy way of saying audit adjustment. So any adjustments we had during the audit, we had no uncorrected misstatements. If we had any disagreements with management, we'd be required to communicate those. I'm glad to report we did not have any disagreements with management. We do receive a management representation letter, which basically is that isn't signed yet, but is in the inbox for Mr. Green. To sign, basically stating that what you see in the financial statements is true and correct. And then lastly, if there's any consultations with other auditors, that other firm would be required to actually consult with us first just to make sure they have all the facts and circumstances. It's kind of the equivalent of a second opinion. We're not aware of any second opinions or anyone that came to us. And so I want to touch on just a couple of things. As you look at the financial statements, there's obviously a lot of information there. And so I want to kind of boil that down into maybe what's really important, and also some of the other items of significance for the audit. So obviously, as you guys know, having some assistance from Pinellas Suncoast Transit Authority and Debbie and her team, along with the addition of Melanie, has been obviously huge, and something that kind of changed from last year's audit, having additional players kind of help us see this to the end, and obviously feel good about kind of the future and direction that TBARTA is going on the accounting and financial side. Two other footnotes I wanted to at least highlight. The first one is a subsequent event footnote. So a subsequent event is anything that happens after the date of our balance sheet. It's not reflected in numbers yet. So I recommend you go and check out the subsequent event footnote because it's going to talk more about what's happening today. It's a little more relevant because the activities that you'll see in the subsequent event are not in the financial statements group. And then lastly, the economic dependency footnote is a big one. It kind of leads into our next slide. It has to do with the fact that as we look at your revenue sources, you are heavily dependent on just a couple of grants and a couple of grantors. And so it's always important to keep that in mind as you look at, the sustainability of the organization long term, what the ultimate goals are. Do we have a goal to be, generating more of our own income and being more self-sufficient? So something to always keep in mind. And as you look at the total revenues over the kind of goes from right to left in terms of old to new, you'll see that there are fluctuations in your funding sources. Excuse me. The primary reason for that is you're largely dependent on grants. And so as grant money comes in, your revenue will go up. And as those maybe dry up or you don't have those opportunities, they go down. And so obviously, it's important just to keep that top of mind and making sure that complying with all the grantor requirements is the main thing. And so, if we were to overlay the revenue and the expense graph, you would see that the real takeaway here is more so that as kind of grant money comes in, expenses generally go up. If we saw an inverse relationship, we would come to you and maybe be a little bit more concerned, or at least raise that awareness to say, hey, look, we're not, it doesn't seem like you're necessarily living within the means of, the sources of funding that you're receiving. However, that's not the case, and really wasn't going to go into too much detail on this slide other than just kind of show that trend over time. And again, so when you look at revenue, obviously it's kind of gone up and down over the years. But again, I think we'll probably see more steady revenue moving forward. Primarily because of the fact that, as Debbie had kind of mentioned, and as we kind of noted in one of our cash management notes, is ensuring that those reimbursement requests are done in a timely basis, so you're not having those peaks and valleys where you're waiting, 3, 4, 5 months to do a reimbursement. It's more on a regular basis, and so we should see more leveling out in the future. And so, with that, I do want to say it was a pleasure to work. Mr. Green and his team on the audit this year, and be glad to take any questions that you guys may have.
Chair,
Yes.
quick question, in view of your observation too that we are grant dependent and there's certain inherent risk to the sustainability of the enterprise, would you recommend, as many governmental and private sector organizations do, is have a kind of a risk assessment section of an audit to make those recommendations going forward for a year?
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent thing to do. Knowing knowing where your risk exposure at obviously is huge, right? And so yeah, we always recommend as the organization continues to grow. Obviously, we know it's kind of still in a kind of a small state. Obviously, you have a lot going on. Not that you're a small organization, but obviously the potential and future is bright. So yes, as you bring on, new ventures, new opportunities, new grants, new lines of business, we always recommend that there be some type of formal thought process that goes into that and documentation. Because unfortunately, what I have seen over the years with some organizations is, so for instance, TBARTA has become kind of, is the kind of the trying to be the organization of choice when it comes to transportation matters, right? Come to us if there's an issue and we want to try to fix that. And so as you do that, what can happen with the city or county is they come to you and say, hey, we have a great deal. We'd love to give you this, 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 and this. And we'd love for you to take over that. And then, however, we're just going to give it to you. We're not necessarily going to commit the funding to it. So having that, kind of systematic approach to say, okay, we're going to evaluate everything and make sure we've got a good business rationale is really key.
And one major point, just make sure you read the agreement. I mean, whenever you get new funding and it's unique and different, it's okay, what are the objectives, but also what are the requirements? Obviously, that's something that we look at closely, but that often gets missed. Is this even a grant? Is it a federal grant? Is it a state grant? What do I have to do to comply with this grant? If there's any ambiguities, just making sure that you have those discussions with the respective grantor agencies up front to make sure you know exactly what you're getting into.
Well, to that point, Chair, I would personally like to see, and I don't know if it's consensus of the Finance Committee, a special report from the auditors on risk assessments. Because as we were evolving and taking on new projects, have bonding authority and on and on and on, I think that will be a valuable thing to have. I don't think it's been needed up to this date, but probably prospectively it is. And I would encourage the Finance Committee to look at that and maybe make a substantive recommendation to the full board on a risk assessment category that our auditors report periodically.
Happy to do that.
Thank you. Anything else for the good of the order?
Just, closing comments from me. Like I said, the audit is substantially complete with your, unless you have any concerns, want us to pull anything back. With your approval and acceptance, we will proceed with finalization so we can get that final issue report out to management, out to the general public, and out to the state for that 6:30 deadline. And then we also have a board meeting that obviously follows this. We can we can condense this presentation so you don't have to hear it in quite the detail that you're hearing it here. I unfortunately do have a conflict. I'm presenting at a fraud conference in Lakeland on process automation and fraud prevention. Cool stuff, but that's, I guess, another advantage of having two principals here instead of one. So Lance will be covering the presentation for the board meeting. But as far as finalization of audit, everything, like I said, is substantially complete. We'll be able to proceed with finalization unless you have any concerns to the contrary.
So are there any concerns? Do I see a consensus to move this to the full board meeting for approval there? Yes? All in favor?
I had one quick question on
Yeah.
the risk assessment. Are we going to include the recommendation for risk assessment into the recommendations to the board today? Is that going to be a part of what we
I think we should,
include?
if that's appropriate.
I'm in agreement.
I have a question with the risk assessment. The risk assessment, will it be something that we need to budget for, or is it already part of that package?
Good question. Can
Could
you
they
answer?
just throw it in for us?
No, yeah.
The question is there something we need to budget for you to do the risk assessment? Is that an additional cost?
It would be. We're not a nonprofit organization, unfortunately. We're not working on a volunteer basis. But yeah, we can put together, get a deeper understanding of the scope and the level of effort.
I think that would be appropriate so that we actually don't get ourselves upside down.
Sure.
Thank you.
That's what my concern was, Madam Chair.
Is that all right with you, Mr. Chair?
Solicit an SOW from them and scope and a proposal on the additional
That's what
cost.
my next step was.
Yeah,
So we can take those actions separately.
yes, correct.
I agree.
So we'll make the recommendation based on the fact that we have the money to pay you. How about that?
That's perfect. We'll work on developing that SOW.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Anything else, Mr. Chair?
Good.
Anybody else? Okay, then we shall we move to the next item quickly because we're going to run out of time otherwise?
We've got 10 minutes.
Okay, but we have another item on the agenda, so
Thank you.
David? Thank you.
Yes. Chris?
Thank you very much. I will be brief. I'm Chris Jadek, Director of Communications, and we're here today with an item requesting an additional $2,150 be added to the budget for the website development, and this involves Spanish language translation. So in brief, and I will have a full presentation on the website later today for the board meeting. This item regards Spanish language translation. As you know, the board earlier this year authorized a not-to-exceed budget of $60,000 for the website redesign. We subsequently entered into a contract with FKQ to do the website redesign at $60,000. I came on board in April, and in reviewing the statement of work and the deliverables, noticed that we did not have a Spanish language alternative as we do on our current website, and as a lot of other websites do as well. And going back to FKQ asking why this was not part of that project, they said in order to bring it within our $60,000 budget, that was an item they could not provide. That would be outside the scope of work. I asked them, okay, let's find a reasonable economic way by which we can provide this, because this is 13% of our population within our 5-county area, and it's a significant population we want to be accessible to. Their recommendation was for $2,150 that they can provide an additional language alternative. As you will see in my presentation later, there will be a tab on the website by which you can click English or Spanish, and there would be that Spanish language component to it. So the request today is to increase the not-to-exceed budget by that amount in order for us to provide that service.
Well, I guess, Debbie, could you please come forward and share with us whether or not we have those dollars to allocate?
I'm not sure if they've spoken to FDOT, but that would be FDOT eligible, and we'd have to work with them on that, but I can't imagine it wouldn't be. I ran out of the room. But that would be something that we could look at from the CAP standpoint, the Commuter Assistance Program, I would
So
presume.
it's 10 minutes to 10. Our board meeting starts at 10.
I'll talk to Katina.
Before we get to this item on the board, at the board meeting, do you think you might have time to talk to Katina and
I
just make
will.
an
I
inquiry
will.
so that we can
I will.
potentially move forward?
Yes.
Does that meet with everybody's approval?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to do this.
Well, I'd recommend that we recommend to the board, to ourselves, and the rest of the board members, that we advance this, swiftly advance this
Yeah.
program.
Yeah.
Okay, terrific. Thank you very much. Stay tuned. We're not saying yes, we're not saying no.
I just emphasize that we are developing the website. We are at the point where we do need to make that decision whether we're going to do that or not. So there's some urgency there.
And may I ask if you were in a position to answer it? We've been talking about this website for a very, very long time. Do you have any idea when we might see a peak preview?
Probably about half an hour from now. It's on the agenda for the full board.
Okay, just wanted to make sure you were on target.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay. Anything else for the good of the order, David? No? No? No other business, no future meeting subjects that we haven't already discussed? Okay. Then may I have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
We are adjourned. I don't have a gavel, but we are adjourned. Thank you. All right, so, yeah. Well, we go.